My name is Lilly Weinberg. I am a program director at the Knight Foundation, and thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I know you had a lot of options, and we're really happy that you're here to talk about what we think is a really important topic, embedding information as a core part of your strategy, or just embedding it as part of your strategy as a funder. And I think that we have three really interesting examples from across the country that are starting to do that, that are experimenting with it, and that have done that. And I think that in this session, you know, what we can do is we can get into the how, the why, what's worked, what hasn't, what's hard, what are some of the questions that we have with getting tactical with this work. So with that, I want to introduce our panel. And I really am a big fan of these three and the community foundations that they're part of. We have Michael Murphy, the Chief Marketing Officer of the Cleveland Foundation, here. Chris Barge, the VP of Strategic Initiatives at the Community Foundation of Boulder County, a Knight community. And Mauricio Palma, Director of Initiatives and Special Projects at the Silicon Valley Community Foundation, also a Knight community. And the way that we're going to put this in the order of Michael's going to go first. And I would say, I think this is fair to say, you know, the Cleveland Foundation is starting to think about this work.
We're 3 months old.
Yes, 3 months old. Starting to think about this work, which may be the place where you are at. And so I'm going to hand it over to you, Michael, to dive right in. And each of them are going to have about 5 minutes to tell you a bit about what they're thinking and doing. Sound good? Okay.
Good. Thank you, Lilly. Maybe before we start, we could get a show of hands if you are completely new to this idea of news and information at a community foundation. Anybody new to this space?
Okay.
Okay, you are my people. This is good. Okay. So our story in Cleveland actually began a year ago at the Knight Media Forum here in Miami, and it actually begins with a quote from Alberto, and so I wrote it down, so I want to read it to you because it sparked the whole journey for us a year ago. And his quote was, "Foundations have a critical role to play in both reestablishing trust in media and fostering media that can be trusted, and we need to rebuild common ground." So I've actually attended the Knight Media Forum for the past 5 years, and I've been continuously impressed by what my peers at other community foundations are doing around the country, but I'm also the marketing guy at a community foundation. So this idea of how do I get my leadership team and a board of directors to understand why this could potentially be a strategic area of investment for us as a community foundation when resources are finite and you only have so many dollars to invest in the community. Knight invited us last summer to attend the First Amendment Conference and the Media Funders Forum, and there was another quote, so I'm a quote guy, and this is the one that really ignited the journey for us, and the quote was, "Community foundations represent the holy grail in funding for local news gathering." So in the span of 4 months, I've heard we have both the responsibility and the resources to get into this game, but I couldn't really figure out how to do it. At the same time, in Cleveland and Akron, there is no more crucial conversation to be having right now about local journalism, because in the city of Cleveland, from the year 2000 to last year, the Northeast Ohio Newspaper Guild went from 750 reporters to 253. And which means that 2/3 of our professional news gathering staff in the city of Cleveland are now gone. At the Plain Dealer, which is our daily newspaper of record, that number went from 350 to 70. And next month, it's expected that 29 union employees will be laid off. So what does this mean for a community foundation? It means for us that there's an information vacuum in the community. And to layer complexity on top of this, one of the projects we've been doing with Knight for the past 18 months is exploring adult literacy in our community. And in the city of Cleveland, 2 out of 3 adults ages 18 and over have a reading level of 4th grade or below. So not only can they get the information that they're looking for because the lack of capacity and resources from a local journalism perspective, but even if they are getting the information, the opportunity to actually comprehend that information is extremely limited. So as a community foundation, it's a big question for us, but the answer is, are we doing our job as a foundation if the nonprofits we are lifting up in our community, the residents aren't actually aware that those resources are available? So it represents an information gap, and it represents a huge missing component of our strategy. So these past 3 months, this is why we're 3 months old, we have partnered with the Knight Foundation to do a local media ecosystem project. If you take the academic jargon out of that, what that is really understanding what the environment is before we insert ourselves into the conversation. And so these past 3 months, we've done a 4-part research project. The first is to understand what are the local news and information assets that currently exist in the community. And we're looking at it for both Cleveland and Akron, because Akron is our sister city to the south. It's also a Knight community. And so it makes a lot of sense because people who live in Akron work in Cleveland and vice versa. So we need to understand what is the regional local media ecosystem. Second, and I would say most important to the work of the Community Foundation, is that we conducted 6 focus groups with residents, 3 in Cleveland and 3 in Akron. And this was an opportunity to just, at a very basic level, understand what are the information needs that residents have in both of these 2 cities. But at the same time, we would have been remiss if we didn't talk to local journalists. So we interviewed more than 20 local journalists in both Cleveland and Akron to understand the challenges that they're facing on the front lines, but also what opportunities they see in local journalism moving forward. And finally, the 4th part of this was content analysis. So it's great if we know what the assets are being put out there, but what kind of content are they putting out into the community? The big question is, what have we learned? And my answer is, I really don't know, because we just looked at the research last night, so it's less than 12 hours old, but there are a couple themes that have really jumped out to us and excite us as a partnership. I think the one theme is that residents in Cleveland and Akron overwhelmingly feel that the news is extremely negative. And and the theme that really emerged from these residents, who are the people that we serve in our community and we are part of the community, is this idea of they are in basic survival mode. They need to know what information exists about housing, about job benefits, about Social Security, about health insurance. They need the basic survival information, and they feel that local journalism is not giving them that information because resident perspective that is not news and that is not enough to write a story about. This other idea that was really telling from residents, and I think this is not unique to Cleveland or Akron, but this idea of they are not actually represented in the newsroom. They don't see themselves in the newsroom. The lack of diversity in Cleveland, which is a majority African-American community, if you go into newsrooms in that community, you are not going to see many journalists of color or any diverse background. So it has built a level of distrust between residents and journalism in Cleveland and Akron, which is pretty striking. So what has happened, and we've learned in this focus group, is this idea that they are going back to a community connector model, that instead of looking to news for information, they are doing the speak over the back fence in the home and talk to people who they trust in their neighborhood that can connect them to the information and resources that they need. They are not reading the newspaper. They are not looking at TV. They're talking to trusted networks within their community. So I'm going to turn it over to Chris now, but what I would say is the question that we are now grappling with is, how do we take these information needs in our community and fill that into every aspect of our grant-making portfolio? Because no matter if it's the arts or education or economic development, if people aren't aware of the nonprofits that we are lifting up, we are not doing our job as a community foundation. So it is a critical time for us to be having this conversation.
Yeah. I actually thought another really interesting finding was around the access or the lack of access to government data.
Yes, so to anybody who's watching from Cleveland, hello, but this is a really good point as well. No, it's good. So it is a tale of 2 cities between Akron and Cleveland in terms of transparent access to data. Reporters are struggling in the city of Cleveland to get access to basic data that the government should open up and provide, whereas in Akron, they get daily emails from the Department of Public Health with data. And right now we face a lead crisis in Cleveland. We face an opioid epidemic like many communities in this room. And if reporters cannot get that health information to unpack those issues and report on them in the community, that is an incredible challenge for them in their job. And there are reporters, let's be fair, who want to do this work, but they are restrained by the lack of transparency from government.
It felt like a low-hanging fruit. Like
It
some,
is,
you know, like a funder could potentially nudge that potentially. Chris, you're up.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Wow, there's a lot of common themes that I'm sure we're seeing across the country. When you talk about survival mode from your residents, you know, when a newsroom goes into survival mode, it looks very different. They start following the police scanner and the city council agendas, and they don't have any time really to do enterprise reporting. And so to illustrate what's going on in Boulder County, I thought I would just open with two stories, different, separated in time, but on either side of our county jail. 17 years ago, when I was a reporter in our local paper, we got a call on a Friday afternoon from a caseworker at the county who said, "I don't ever do this, but this story is just egregious and y'all need to do something or no one will." Joseph Webb is about to be evicted from his many years long home here in the mobile home park, and it's because the California-based landlord says he's a few months back on rent. The thing is, he has a spinal degenerative disease, and he is owed $20,000 from Social Security. The judgment has come down. This is just a timing thing. The landlord's going to get their money, but what they want to do is squeeze out the outdated structures from the park, and they're leveraging this opportunity. We had a story in the paper about it on Saturday, and by Monday, the Community Foundation had responded to an influx of donor interest by opening a fund that exists today. It's called Doorways for the Disabled. It was a lifesaver for Joseph Webb, and it continued to spin off some funds for people that were in housing transitional crisis. That is a story of a civic infrastructure that has a healthy newsroom working in its community. Let's fast forward to this past year. On the other side of the county jail, there's another mobile home park. In this case, they've had water quality issues for many years. This is something that is so bad that residents there are no longer showering using the water out of the tap because it smells like chlorine. They're not drinking it. And so these people who are most low-income residents of our community are spending upwards of $200 a month on bottled water and making do, figuring out how to bathe. This is a story that the local health department and the city and the county and the Community Foundation and others have been involved in trying to fix from behind the scenes, but scant news about it in the local paper. The reporter who was the best reporter at the local paper was interested in doing a big investigation on it. She got a little bit along the road, but she quit in December. Today, we are back in Boulder. I'm sorry to be missing the memorial service for our editor at the local paper who succumbed to cancer recently and is being remembered today. Neither his position nor the City Hall beat reporter's position will be refilled. So we're missing this big chunk of our civic infrastructure. And what that means is that we have a threatened democracy on a local level. So what are we going to do about it? We have a good start. I left some of these magazines on your chair. For the last 20 years, we've had an indicators report on the social, economic, environmental health of Boulder County. In the last go-round, we took a journalistic tack, and we started doing a twofold step. One, it used to be an analysis of what's going on. Then we took the additional step of saying, let's not just see what's new and persistent. Now let's find the people who are living at the center of this, give it a 2-year shelf life, and hire former reporters. Unfortunately, there's talent on the sidelines to do this. And so they came up with this report. We're in production for the biennial report for this year right now. But in addition, with the help of someone in the room here, Lindsay Green Barber and the Knight Foundation, we've been working on what we're starting to call an equity reporting initiative. We've been hearing from our stakeholders that the Trends Report is one of the best things. In fact, they rate it as the best thing that we do. We thought it'd be the grant making, but they like the Trends Report. We're assuming they like the grant making. and it could be larger. But there's several aspects to the equity reporting initiative. First of all, we would like to roll out a Trends podcast so that when we release this report, if we're able to pull this together, we would be able to hire a Latino bilingual journalist and in partnership with our local community radio, be able to not just have a 2-year shelf life on a magazine, but to be able to take some stories to ground. Start to literally provide some of this backfill where enterprise reporting has dropped off. We're talking investigative reporting, solutions-oriented reporting, narrative journalism, explanatory journalism. And then we also foresee trying to build a solutions fund, because we at the Community Foundation have the opportunity to stand on both sides of the story, both to support the civic infrastructure of local news on an enterprise level, but then also to help add some accelerant to the potential community response. This can take many forms, from convening to advocacy to community organizing to grant making. And then finally, we seek to initiate an equity reporting lab. This would be something that worked with our existing media in all formats to get them the training and support and even funding for enterprise stories. I talked recently with, I'm still friends with many over there at the local paper. One of them said, oh, by the way, there was another story. We were working on a 5-part series on affordable housing, but that's just evaporated. We simply don't have the staff. They're expecting 3 more layoffs in the coming weeks. So one last note is that, I mentioned in passing that we want this to be a Latino bilingual journalist. The reason is that also with the Knight Foundation, we've been looking very closely, working with our Latino leaders in our community. Richard Garcia is here in the back of the room, one of our leaders from our Community Foundation. And we've been working with a team and really coming to the conclusion that the messenger is the message. So one of the recommendations on the Knight Commission on Trust and Democracy said we got to diversify newsrooms, but we're getting to the why behind the what of that. And really, until we start hiring people who have the same common experiences as those who we seek to report on and help move in the community, we're going to continue to be on the outside looking in.
Yeah. And I think an important point, Chris, is for the Community Foundation of Boulder County, you guys are, my understanding is one of your values is equity, right?
Yeah, I should have mentioned that.
And as a core component of your grant making. And so as you're thinking about the equity journalism fund, it's really a sweet spot that I want to tease out later. Next, Mauricio.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Lilly, for inviting us. We met a year ago, and it's great to be able to share together in this forum. I can say that my story has many different layers. As a staff of the Community Foundation, you have a person working in marketing and communications, you have a former journalist, and you have a student. So I approached a lot of the work that I'm going to share with you from the point of view of wanting to learn from the people that are doing this work. We also agreed that we were going to share some ideas, but we want to invite you to share your own challenges, your own solutions to some of the same questions that we're dealing with, because we believe that there is a lot of wisdom in the room that might benefit us as well as we continue in this journey. We've been, as Silicon Valley Community Foundation, we've been working on this space now for 5 years, thanks to support that we received from the Knight Foundation. And I believe that the Knight Media Forum is like a university, again, coming at it as a student. So I've learned a great deal about what we have done in our community, thanks to the forum that you've created for us. Another layer of our work is that there is an internal component that I'll be sharing with you as a staff of the Community Foundation. And there is an external component, and I want to call on John Funibiki, who is our partner with Renaissance Journalism in the Bay Area, who's been leading the external efforts to engage journalists and media makers in a region to build a collaborative, of which I'm going to make a couple of references as well. And John is over there trying to not show his hand, but please understand that I'm only giving you part of the story. He has another part of the story that is critical for our work. When we started this journey, I would say that most of our work with journalists was transactional. It was a contract for journalists to come and tell our story. It was about us as a community foundation utilizing the resources of journalists and media makers to create a report that will tell the wonderful work that we are doing. 4 years ago, we had the great fortune of receiving some resources from the Knight Foundation and an invitation to ask a question to explore how the Community Foundation might address the news and information challenge in our community. We were part of the Knight Community Information Challenge at the time. So we didn't hear any of that. What we heard was we have an opportunity to do some PR for one of our critical projects. Again, how do we get the word out? So we went from being preoccupied with how we tell our story to how do we get the word out about our work in the community. Thanks to the support of the Knight Foundation, we were told, stop it. That's not it. And after a year of going back and forth and raising some critical questions about our view of the world, and in particular journalism, we realized that the question had more to do with our community and access to information in the context of the community and the journalism ecosystem that we were connected or disconnected with, more so than what the Community Foundation was going to tell the world about the work that we were doing, whether it was through a story or an outreach effort. So we went from a contract to going back and forth with a question about what role do we play in the community. And once we got clear with the support of John, we made another significant shift to where we are right now. And I need to read it, or else it will take me a few more minutes than I have to share the transition that we took from just posing the question to internalizing that question into concrete work that the Community Foundation can commit itself to. We began to imagine, with the support of John and many in the community, in our local journalism ecosystem, what might happen if local news and media organizations collaborate to address the challenges that the Community Foundation cares a great deal about. It's a different place. Taking into consideration the journey from being preoccupied with getting our story out to having an understanding of the fact that we can create a partnership, that we can actually promote collaboration, that solutions journalism can come out of that process, that community organizations can be engaged in also generating news and information and stories that can be transformative, was probably a 5-year-long journey. What I think allowed us to go from one to the other end of this journey was the full commitment of our president and CEO, Dr. Emmer Carson, who believed that it was important for the Community Foundation not only to be preoccupied with the impact that we are making, but also to elevate the impact that communities are making. And what he pushed us to consider is not the creation of a program in isolation, but how do we introduce journalism in our grant-making work, in our donor engagement work, in our corporate responsibility work, in our initiative and special projects. And where we are right now, and I want to give you a few examples, is continuing to experiment about this integration by identifying the issues that we care most about: immigration, education, housing and transportation, economic security, and civic participation, and building collaborative efforts with journalists and media makers in each one of those spaces. To give you an example, we're presently in conversations with Univision. We'll be there tomorrow to talk about the census. They're building a strategy, a nationwide strategy. They want to implement it in our community. We are interested in facilitating that process, but how can it be connected to the collaborative effort that's going on locally? How can it engage the rural sectors of our community so that it can be fully impactful? Those are questions that we're bringing to the table. We participated with City Lab in a collaborative with the Knight Foundation, KQED, in looking at what are the urban challenges in Silicon Valley. And interestingly enough, housing, education, immigration surface as critical issues affecting the community, which echo what the Community Foundation is interested in. So we didn't have to worry about bringing the story out. In promoting our work, the community also was able to guide us and identify some of the same challenges that we have identified, and more so creating solutions to address some of them. And the last two, one is the work that we're doing with the Renaissance journalism effort that John is leading, which is building a Bay Area media collaborative, which got started from a group of journalists coming together in a roundtable and realizing that we needed to do something about the most critical challenges in our community. Housing was identified, and they said, but there is a way to do it in a much more impactful manner, and that's through collaboration. So we continue experimenting with the support of the Knight Foundation, trying to figure out how best to create a model that works in our region. And we're also creating a fund, or exploring the process by which we can create a fund to support journalism in our region. We do not have a grant-making strategy. We want to integrate our work across the Community Foundation, but the fund is an opportunity for us to invite other funders locally to go on this journey with us and continue to learn and grow with us. So thank you.
Great, thank you. So the way that I'm going to structure this is I'm going to ask a few questions, and then I think the meat of the conversation really needs to be from the audience and asking questions to these three great panelists. So I want to dig in a little bit deeper with a question around the value proposition for the Community Foundation. I mean, you have so much need in your community, whether it's housing, homelessness, adult literacy, whatever it is, and there's a real importance to be able to focus and your work, and then also there's just that you need to make the case for your board or your CEO about this work. So I'd just like to tease out a little bit how you went about making the case for this type of work, that fits into strategic work at your foundation. So I'm looking at you, Chris. So I want to start with you because you're thinking this through. I literally just went through, all the paperwork that you're thinking this through around the equity piece. Right. And so your foundation is committed to equity in Boulder County. But why does journalism matter? Why does ethnic media matter for this issue? I mean, there's so much that could be funded. Like, tell me a little bit more about your thinking for that and the case that was made.
I don't think it could have been possible 2 years ago.
Yeah.
But over the last 2 years, board level and staff level work and the leadership of our CEO right here, Jeff Hirota, he came in 2 years ago and he said, wow, we are an incredibly active community foundation for our size. And full credit for everything that we're doing. But can we step back a minute and pause and say, is there a theory of change? Is there a vision that this all rolls up to other than improving the quality of life in our community? So we went through some deep work. We did a strategic plan. And really, for the first time, I think, came to a comprehensive 360-degree approach to our community. In the past, you know, one of the first times that we collaborated with the Knight Foundation was because we were concerned on an issue-specific area of education equity and school readiness. And so, you know, one of the 10 years ago, you know, grants from the Community Information Challenge was to fund a campaign, an awareness campaign on the importance of early childhood, and we're proud of what that did. I mean, it helped pass a mill levy and, you know, doubled preschool and kindergarten in our community, and that's incredibly important. But until we did that deeper strategic vision work on really what everything rolls up to is a vision of an equitable community in a place where equity is far from being achieved. As you know, and people define it all different ways. What we've latched onto recently is creating systems where all can thrive. When you have that, then you have a very similar perspective of a robust, enterprising news operation who cares about every kind of topic, from transportation to education and regional things, everything under the sun. But let's face it, you know, the reason that they exist and that they're called the Fourth Estate and that they're protected by the First Amendment is because, as you know, our recently deceased editor, you know, used to just defend the people's right to know. And so that, I think, was important, shifting from issue-specific, how might we move the needle, to a generally, what does our community feel like when we pursue our vision? And then we became interested in the whole community's experience, but with a point of view that tracks pretty similar to an investigative reporter's point of view. You know, let's find the information that's being hidden from our community and that is holding us back. There's a pretty strong overlap there as far as goals.
Which you see as critical. You know, you see that journalism piece as critical to this equity within the Boulder County.
Yeah, as our former president, Josie, if you're watching from Boulder, hi Josie, she used to say, you know, you can't call the community to action until they are all educated on what they're trying to act on. And so with this, if all you're doing is following the police scanner and the agenda set by City Hall, and that's what you see in the pages of your newspaper, then A, your paper's getting ignored, you know, because it's not relevant to what the people are saying is relevant. And B, nobody feels moved when you say, come on, guys, we got to do something. Because they're like, well, it looks like you've been talking about something that we haven't been part of.
I think another important piece, Chris, and Michael, you touched upon this too, with the research is that having the journalists look like the community, actually, you know, be representative of the community, and that's a major issue in Cleveland. But I know that as you're thinking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and journalism, that is something that you guys might be funding, and the ethnic media piece. Mauricio, I want to pass this to you though, because you, what's really interesting about the Community Foundation is that you guys have matrixed you know, journalism throughout the organization. That this is, you know, local news and information falls within, you know, like you said, the corporate responsibility, the different programs. I mean, I want to tease that. What does that mean?
Yeah, so it starts with making the case for journalists as partners. I think that we will not stop the collaboration where journalists are hired to help us develop a report. That will continue. I think that the marketing and communications relationship with journalists will also continue. Just like everyone knows, you know, if you run a nonprofit organization, you build relationships to get your story out and to be in, you know, in center stage on issues that are of interest to some journalists. But with regards to the work that we're describing here, I would say that we happen to have a a cluster of program officers that understand the importance and the significance of not only providing support to organizations that are addressing the challenges in the community, that are providing services to members of the community, but that those organizations can be experts that can be useful to journalists that are interested in telling critical stories, that are interested in identifying ways in which the challenges are being solved. The other part has been the ongoing back and forth learning process with John. I believe he's like a sensei. And I believe that the work that we've been doing has been like that of a dojo, where we're continuously practicing different katas, different ways of getting this work done, and we haven't figured it out completely. But one of the back and forth that we have had is, do we call journalists in a meeting to tell them about our strategic plan with a desire to inspire them to write stories about the strategic plan? Or do we invite journalists to a meeting to have conversations about how they can advance some of the solutions that members of our network are generating? And another example is, can we partner with journalists to elevate maybe issues that the Community Foundation identifies to be critical, not only to the institution, but to the community at large? And we have a space called the Center for Early Learning, was responsible for bringing all the candidates for the gubernatorial race in California last year. And the way that we saw an opportunity here was to co-sponsor with journalistic institutions a televised and well-documented gubernatorial debate, sponsored by the Community Foundation in collaboration with some major media networks. Was a shift that we had not experienced before. And again, it allows us to play the role of bringing people together to figure out ways of utilizing their tools to advance solutions. In this particular case, what we were interested in was to make sure that the candidates would elevate the significance of early learning throughout the state by becoming committed to advancing solutions in the early learning space without necessarily having the Community Foundation being the one that's pushing this continuously, but building a partnership 3 ways with the candidates, with journalists, and with nonprofit organizations in our community. We were successful in not only organizing the debate, but in continuing the process, this partnership with the players that were critical in this debate beyond the elections. So right now, there are folks that are coming together. The governor is looking at the possibility of collaborating with philanthropy around this space. And all of that comes from just kind of reimagining. You have all the players already together, but how do we go about doing our work? It's part of what we are exploring together.
What I keep on hearing at this conference and from actually the 3 of you is this idea around engagement journalism. I mean, it's journalism, and that community is at the core of it, and that's a really critical piece. I have a question for you, Michael. So let's talk about how you and your team made the case for doing research at your foundation. Like, why was that important to start there?
Yeah, I think it came at a really fortunate time for us because we had just begun our strategic planning process as an organization, And so part of that work was doing a perception study with Gallup about how people view the community foundation. And so that was information need at its core. But I think as community foundations, we often rely on our nonprofit partners to tell us what the community needs versus removing that layer and going out to the community directly and asking them what they need. Or we have as community foundations, we often say these are the priorities of the community. Here we want everybody to focus on these areas. Well, what if we could remove that layer and actually ask the community what information needs, what are the issues that are most critical? So to frame this research as an opportunity to enhance our overall vision for the enterprise by saying at the core, we started this movement 105 years ago to enhance the lives of Greater Clevelanders. Let's go back to that. Let's go back to that idea of what are the needs for the people who live in our community and put information needs. For us, local journalism is part of the solution of addressing information needs. It's pitching it to our board as lifting up newsrooms is not going to cut it. Pitching it to our board as addressing core information needs of our residents, that's going to go so much farther in the conversation. So it was reframing in our mind, thanks to all the inspiration for these two and people I met at this conference, just to think of it differerly.
Yeah, I think that's really, really smart. Listen, the clock is ticking, so I want to open it up to the audience and see, questions that we have. I know this isn't a shy group. Come on. Yes. And if you can say your name and where you're from.
Stand up, okay. Hi, I'm Keith Mahoney. I'm with the Boston Foundation. And this is a question for Chris. So we have an indicators project, and we've had it for a while, and we've kind of shifted from big data dump reports to more curated, topical things on, here's something you don't know about the local opioid crisis or criminal justice reform. And in doing so, we've relied on our social channels and then on earned media to get that message out. What you've done with the trends seems to be even a further step along there that brings in I don't want to say opinion journalism, but it kind of gets closer to a Atlantic or some guide like that, whereas we're sort of here are just the facts, we're non-partial, we just want to give the information out there. How have you navigated that as you've worked on the project?
You're asking about the difference between an opinion and a point of view. And I would say a couple of things. We've thought deeply about that. And I think that where we've landed is that if you were looking for a section in your daily paper to liken our approach in our magazine to, and you would probably find it in the Metro columnist. The person who's writing includes original reporting and also reflection and thoughtfulness, and it is presented in the news pages rather than on the opinion pages. And we're doing that because we don't. We are not partisan, but we also are not without a point of view. And our point of view is a vision for a more equitable future. We're not neutral on the fact that some people go without enough food. We're not neutral on the fact that some people can't afford rent. We're not neutral on discrimination, on down the line. And so that is, something that I even learned on the journalism side when I was a reporter. I loved one time I heard someone say, the truth doesn't stand on the 50-yard line between what he said and what she said. And so in pursuing journalism, you are pursuing truth. You are raising the facts, and the additional layer that we're bringing to this is a lens that at the end of the day, this ought to be a community where everyone here can thrive. So, if we're going to get pushback about that, we'll take it.
Yeah, I mean, it goes to what Grant was saying, right, about I think the Solutions Fund, though, I know it's separate, but I think that's really interesting what you guys are doing with the Solutions Fund and funding, actual ideas that come out of it, right?
As we're conceiving it right now, I'm thinking of it as an accelerant to the community's broad response. It's Marshall Gans says that information doesn't. The power differential is not an information problem; it's a power problem, right? So it's naive to think that just supplying the community with data is going to change the reality. But if you are able to combine some enterprise reporting and add the accelerant of all of the things that a community foundation can help with, from convening to grants, either both to get stories out or to catalyze change, advocacy, some community organizing. There's different ways that you can accelerate the community response and sort of get the fence sitters to go ahead and jump in.
Yeah. I saw a question over here.
I'm Brian Boyle with Issue Media Group out of Detroit. This might be a question for the Knight Foundation.
Sure.
But I would think the work of community foundations, fundamental what you're trying to accomplish is increase community attachment. And I'm kind of reflecting back on Soul of the Community.
Yeah.
And intellectually you would think that as media contracts and evolves to the click model, right, the disinvestment in investigative, solutions-oriented reporting, narrative reporting, you would think has a fundamental disconnection of community. Right, and I'm wondering,
investments have a disconnection.
as media evolves, right, and the types of news it's reporting on now fundamentally disconnects people from the community, right? I'm curious, is there research that can prove that out? Right, if research existed that showed the evolution of local media is disconnecting people from community, and there needs to be a response, do you think it would arm community foundations and local advocates with more ammunition to kind of pursue the right work?
Yeah, I mean, there definitely there is research, and I know Lindsay, you're nodding your head, so you can jump in. I mean, I think that we are going to actually do another Soul of the Community, which will look at the information piece within the communities too, and attachment to community. So Soul of the Community looks at what are the key indicators for community members attaching to their community, and it's a partnership between Knight and Gallup. We're going to do it in all 26 Knight cities, including Detroit. And so there's that. I think, Lindsay, why don't you jump in and with some of what you think is some of the most important research that touches upon this.
Sure.
And introduce yourself, sorry.
Hi, I'm Lindsay. I do strategy and research on the impact of media and work with funders like Knight and others that support journalism and social change communications groups. I would just say yes, there's a lot of research that shows that the lack of local news, especially explanatory reporting and investigative reporting, leads to disconnect among community, but also has all kinds of other adverse effects also in terms of the economics of local policies, local politics, accountability, actual economic costs in local communities. So you can make arguments to people's heads, to people's hearts, whatever is going to work, that having more local reporting is good for communities kind of across the board. There's also a lot of research that shows different types of engaged journalism and the different types of trust that it can build both between organizations and communities and within and among communities. I'm happy to chat afterwards and start to point. And I should say Media Impact Funders has lots of resources on their sites too about different types of research that's available there.
Vince, do you want to jump in? Sorry, I didn't see you back there. You're hiding. Yeah. Vince is a great resource, Media Impact Funders.
And it's greater still, because we just relaunched our website. Media Impact Funders or Media Funders will get you there. And we've also surfaced a lot of the impact work to really pull it forward. And we just had a newsletter go out, redubbing it as Tracking Media Impact, which is TMI. But anyway, I don't know if we'll stick with that. Yeah.
Thank you. Vince. Question here.
Hi, I'm Marcia Parker. I'm the publisher of Cal Matters, a state news nonprofit in California. I've been working a lot with Mauricio. Thank you. I just want to say thank you to all you guys for helping make this conversation happen. I think it's really important. And I'm going to ask, I'll make a request too. I think one of the things that we can do as this conversation opens is if you guys can also convene your people, right, like your networks, to keep making this conversation grow, because it's a big part of what I think we're starting to do as journalists, and our news organizations are starting to do more things that we didn't used to do before, big convenings on topics. And as we do big projects, we're really doing more community building in a way, even though we have to stop at a certain, there's a line there. So anyway, I just feel like the conversation's developing all over America, and it's a wonderful feeling. It's certainly happening in California. Mauricio is really helping us with that. But I do think that there's a lot of room for taking the collaborations to the next level, and that actually engages the people that you reach. And I think that's really an important part of our work.
There's a huge fear factor, to be honest, because if you're not in this space, how do you even frame it so that people understand it? And but knowing that a lot of markets are facing both an information crisis and a local journalism crisis, community foundations are all about getting in the middle of crises and trying to solve for them. So, and it's an economic development aspect, there's an education aspect, so it makes so much sense.
Yeah.
But I think it's this moment in time that we all have to rally around and do the work now.
Yeah.
Because we're not gonna, hopefully we're not gonna have this chance again. Yeah.
Yeah, Mauricio.
Yeah,
Well said.
over the course of time, and Marce reminded me of this, one of the things that I've learned is that there is a tension between the local, the regional, and the national in terms of a very basic question of what is more important to invest in. I've been told by some community partners at the national level that it's best for us to invest in large national media structures and programming that will impact a larger number of people. And that for us to invest in small, local, more experimental type of outfits might not necessarily be a good investment. And we come from the point of view that maybe that latter argument is inconsistent with what community foundations are all about. We should be experimenting locally. We should be taking risks and asking questions that invite solutions that have not been tested locally. And one of the great examples of how the tension can become an opportunity is what Cal Matters does in California. We had a gathering with nonprofit organizations that have their investments within the community foundation to build their endowment. And they come together on an annual basis and wanted to take a look at the issue of housing, particularly because nonprofit organizations have staff that are resident in our community who are dealing with the challenges of housing and transportation. And also nonprofit organizations as renters themselves are also dealing with the question of where do we house our operations in our community.
Yeah.
So Cal Matters had done extensive work on the electoral process and the issue of housing as it appeared in the electoral process. And they were able to bring a journalist, their executive director, facilitator, a panel discussion, and a partner of theirs in a county that's within our vicinity, San Benito County, had developed a tool with the support of the local community foundation. It's actually a digital media outlet, Benito Link. They joined the conversation, and together they demonstrated that there is an opportunity for you to be able to develop regional infrastructure with journalists that are covering state issues, so on and so forth, and having a conversation with local journalists that are receiving support from this regional infrastructure. So trying to separate them, I think, is inconsistent also with what's actually going on. We're much more dynamic and fluid and continuously are sharing information. So just wanted to put that out there, that sometimes I approach this question of local versus national or regional with a lot of questions, because I feel that we're trying to create something that's artificial in terms of what the reality looks like in our region.
Yeah, and as Alberto said this morning, there's a strength in local, and local leads to trust. There's a strength in local, and local leads to trust. I love that. Questions, more questions? Yes. You can, I mean, I think you can just, it's not, yeah.
Hi, I'm Erica with Open News. We're an organization that supports technologists within journalism. And I'm really curious about this topic around collaboration and acceleration.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the conversation has been about getting information out and the role of relating with journalists in that. I'm curious about opportunities for bringing the information back into your other grantees and how to show that like the reporting that is being done can be actionable and influential. And just curious about like there have been some examples already stated, but like if there are other examples or if that is a compelling way to talk about the role of journalism in terms of bringing the like reporting and data analysis into nonprofits so then they can act on that information and it can inform their work. So just
Great question.
curious about that.
I would say that the person right behind you, John Funibiki, can provide, from a strategic point of view, how we're looking at collaboration in our region. It's not just about journalists and philanthropists coming together or journalists coming together, but what is the role of nonprofit organizations that are part of the Community Foundation Network and beyond in the process of building a collaboration. Just about a week or so ago, we came together to look at goals for 2019, and this was an issue that we are looking at. So internally, to answer your question, we're working with John to figure out how do we organize and curate conversations, intentional conversations between journalists and nonprofit organizations around issue areas. However, the collaborative is focused on the issue of housing. So John can tell you what they've done, wonderful work of bringing together both sectors to have conversations about solution in the Bay Area. And John is right there. So I don't want to push it, but I think that he has more examples to share with you.
John is an expert, and I don't want to put Marcel on the spot, but I'm going to put you on the spot.
That's right.
I also think that you have a great example of a journalism collaborative in Long Beach, and how listen, you don't have to. I mean, I just wanted to connect you guys, and how you had this collaborative focused on an issue, and a lot of that was actually getting that information to grantees in your community and to the people that are working on the specific topic. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, or if you wanted to highlight that.
Is this on?
You can.
Is this on? Just real quick, when we did the collaboration, and thanks to the Knight Foundation for helping us fund that, it was around, we worked with Solutions Journalism and really looked at kind of what the issues were in the community, and there were quite a few, but the one that bubbled to the surface was the digital divide, and that 17% of households in Long Beach didn't have access to the internet, whether it was economic or structural or otherwise. And fast forward through the collaboration, they really blitzed the community online and in all the different print and online media publications. But what happened was they won 2 CNPA awards for their coverage, California Newspaper Publishers Association, and most importantly, locally, City Council got their attention, and they started to take action on it, which really mattered. And so they're going to look at homelessness and housing, which Mauricio and I have talked about, and that's really exciting as well. So
great, thank you.
I don't know if part of the answer to this question too is there needs to be some relationship building between the nonprofit community and the local journalism community, because I think often nonprofit organizations from where I sit are not valued as sources or experts in the community, and they can't get anyone to write on the issues. There hasn't been a story about literacy in Cleveland in 10 years.
Wow, yeah.
And it's an epidemic, right? So resources are scarce on both sides of the equation. So how can each be a source to the other, I guess?
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
Building on that, we also had the opportunity, as Long Beach did as well, to participate in the implementation of the On the Table experiment funded by the Knight Foundation. And that became a wonderful platform to have journalists sit in conversations with community leaders, not as journalists. In other words, not there to take notes on what everyone else is saying, but to be engaged in conversations from the point of view of being a resident in the community and elevating the storytelling to a whole different level, one that could put out of the sight the role of the journalist. Of course, you cannot divorce one from the other, but to the relationship building point, that worked really well, and it continues to be a strategy that we have used. so as to look at other issues that can be organized in the same way.
And just a shameless plug for On the Table. If you're interested in learning more, you're welcome to talk to me about it. But we also have Rick in the room who has been a really important consultant for the On the Table initiative and is also helping to build out the national network for folks that are outside of night cities. If you want to be able to plug in and pull this off in your community, talk to him. I saw one other hand. Yes. Okay. And then this is the last question, so make it a good one.
Okay. I don't know about that. I'm Dave Vincent from
no pressure.
From Gulf Coast Community Foundation. How do you address the different age groups when you're looking at all these issues you're talking about? Do you look at a person who's 20, 25, how they're going to consume this information? Someone 60, 65 or older? How do you do that? Because you've got a wide audience there.
Right. Yeah. The focus groups that we did in both communities represented different ages, different perspectives, different income, different races. And so as we think about implementing the recommendations in the research, we're mindful that not everyone consumes their news in the same way. So what may work in one specific neighborhood is not going to work for a generation that gets their news on YouTube, as we learned this morning. So you have to be able to segment. Fortunately, I feel like as a community foundation, we're always out there raising dollars, and so we know how to segment audiences. So how do you do the same thing when it comes to information? And so that's part of it. And I think there are some fascinating nonprofit journalism models that are answering that very question, so we're looking at those too. Yeah.
Oh, we have one more. Okay, Vince.
I just wanted to respond to Marcia's point earlier when she said that we should be continuing to meet, and so that is part of our role, and we are going to be convening journalism funders, something we do annually in a different city. This year it's going to be in San Francisco, first week of October. Stay tuned for more logistical details, but we definitely see that as our role in working with Knight to bring people together, especially the community foundations we're interested in.
Perfect. So funders that are interested in learning more about how to do this, that are interested in getting tactical and understanding how do we invest in the information needs in our community, Media Impact Funders convening is a great way to do that. And Michael, you were there.
One of my quotes is from there.
Yes, one of the quotes was from there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mauricio, Chris, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you.